Today we're going to talk about human needs ministries, and you can find that in chapter 31 in your textbook. And human needs ministries really have been around since the very beginning. And basically what we're talking about is those issues that sometimes are called relief ministries or compassion ministries. They have to deal with such thing as food and clothing and medical needs and hunger, and those type things are all part of the human needs ministry. We're going to look at the history of the relief and development missions, and the Bible is filled with compassion ministries. There's many places in the Bible. Jesus fed the 5,000. On one occasion, he fed the 4,000. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. So, having compassion ministries as a part of our total mission vision is a good thing. It's always been a part of who we are. But as we look at the development of the relief and development ministries in missions, back in the 70s, it really became an issue that kind of polarized the Christian world. As a matter of fact, the polarization came when people began to focus on social ministries rather than spiritual ministries. And the World Council of Churches in 1968 adopted the theme, and they said humanization as the goal of ministry. And what they were saying is all Christian missions ought to have as its core, as its goal, of helping human relief needs, helping these needs. And that kind of polarized people, because they were saying, the World Council of Churches was saying that all ministries need to be geared toward human suffering. And another group said, no, it's more important to be involved in spiritual ministries. The physical body is eventually going to die, but if a person is born again, they'll live forever. So what is more important, the physical body or the spiritual life? The spiritual body. So that began to be a polarizing thought in missiology. Now, the Southern Baptist Convention, from the very beginning, Southern Baptist ministries have been holistic. They have addressed the whole person in an actual life situation, not just the soul. Early on, the use of medical missionaries, building hospitals around the world, is evidence of this. In the mid-1970s, the Foreign Mission Board, as it was called then, began to formally address relief and development strategies in terms of statements and concepts. After a 1974 special study, it became one of the 5 parts of Baker James Cawthon's vision statement of what the Foreign Mission Board was to do. A Bible in one hand and a loaf of bread in the other, as he used to say. The Foreign Mission Board's trustees adopted that, and their mission statement said this: the task of missions, supremely and imperatively, is to make disciples, to baptize them, and to teach them to observe all that Christ commanded. It includes all the world, every creature, every generation. The task of missions is also to minister compassionately to those who are hungry, thirsty, strangers, lack of clothing, sick, imprisoned, and so forth. So, Southern Baptists have always had in their mind it is not either or, but both and. Not everyone has bought into that. um, we began to respond to things like disaster relief, and that really became about in '74. Um, we began to have a disaster relief coordinator. World Hunger Day came about in 1978, which continues to today as one of the primary funding for the holistic Southern Baptist Convention work around the world. The IMB, as it's called now, started a human needs ministry department that was renamed the Southern Baptist Relief and Development Organization. They called it Baptist Global Response, or BGR. The HNWHRM office of the IMB phased out, and now they're working under this, global relief effort. And they raise about $10 to $12 million a year to do that, which is both physical and spiritual. So that's been kind of where the study has gone. There's a biblical basis for it, and you can see that more in your textbook on page 447, 448. I'll let you read that. But we're gonna move on and talk about the strategic link of this type of ministry to global missions. And the strategic link to global missions is what became known as the 1040 window. Okay, in 1990, Louis Bush began to talk about a vast area of the world from North Africa across Asia continent all the way to China, and it's between the 10th and 40th latitude. It's commonly known as the 1040 window. And if you look at a global map between the 10th latitude and the 40th latitude, you will find that takes across most of North Africa, the Middle East, India, China, Korea. It takes in part Central America. But in that 1040 window, you'll really find three different distinct things. It's a major window of population. A large percentage of the world's population, 4.5 billion out of the 7 billion people on Earth, live there. They also, 90% of the unreached people groups are in that 1040 window. The second thing, it's not only a window to major populations, but it's a window into major world religions. If you look at that window there, you'll find that there's 1.2 billion Muslims, 1 billion Hindus, 600 million Buddhists, more than 1 billion others in the 1040 window who live under the influence of communism and socialism. It has been described as a belt of spiritual darkness, with most countries and places being creative access countries within which different strategies must be employed in order to gain access. So it's really a good way to look at the lostness of the world. But the 1040 window is also a window of poverty and critical human needs and suffering. If you'll look in that window, you will see also that it is some of the poorest people in the world. Over the past 50 years, the wealthy Christian world has gotten wealthier. The lost have gotten poorer. So not only is the 1040 window, the world's religions are there, the world's population is there, but also most of the world's poverty is also in that window. It's also an area of armed conflict as well. A lot of these countries are experiencing ongoing wars and um, tribal issues and things like that. So it's important to look at these type of ministries that are going on. Now let's look at a couple of types. Okay. First of all, as you look at these things, you'll find in the book that he talks about practical aspects of relief and development strategies, and he talks about a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language. That's the new push of the IMB. And he talks about unreached groups or unreached people groups. And then he talks about unengaged, unreached people groups. And we really have to look at that and as a way of identifying where lost people are and where we are to minister. Now, two types. They really fall into two categories. One is acute human need problems. Now, these stem from disasters such as war, famine, earthquakes, floods, etc. Now, this type is a short-term needs. We can talk about the tsunami that hit. You can talk about Hurricane Katrina. You can talk about earthquakes that decimate a country or a place. And instantly, you have acute human need problems. And you need a global response team who will help provide such things as food, potable water, medical needs, clothing, help, because it's going to take a while for all these services to get restarted. When there's been, like in Hurricane Katrina, when a breakdown of basic social services, food, water, garbage pickup, supply chains are broken, bridges are washed out, no electricity, then you see things become very critical, very acutely, very quickly. And so you have to be able to respond to those and to bring those human needs in. But most of these are short term. Now, it may take 6 months, it may take a year, but there is a goal in mind where these people will get back on their feet and services will once again begin to expand. The second type is chronic human needs. Now, these include human suffering due to hunger, poverty, poor health, etc. These are more long-term needs. These are those humanitarian needs that aren't going to be solved overnight, that there's not an end in sight, that you are going to have to look at ways to help them long term. That's very different than a short-term philosophy or a short-term fix. A short-term fix, you can say, here are 2,000 people who need water, and I can get them 10,000 gallons, and that will give every person water for a gallon a person per day for 5 days. And you can calculate it that way. But when you're talking chronic human needs, long term, how can I get them water on a consistent basis for years to come? You see, it becomes a different problem to solve, a different philosophy. So you have to understand what you're looking for. uh, when you start talking about approaches, a disaster relief program mainly addresses acute needs that are really short term. But on the other hand, chronic human needs demand a development approach. How can we develop a program that will teach them how to dig wells so they can get their own water? How can we develop a farming program that will teach them to raise more food or a more substantial amount of food that moves them from subsistence farming to production farming? So you see that the type of need that you're addressing determines what methodology you're going to use to get them to that point. So it's important. Now you'll find in your book on page 452 and 453, he lists several, like a training center or institutional approach. Technology transfer, that's an extension type of program. Community-based health programs. These are growing out of the necessity of long-term human care. There may need to be education by extension or university programs or community development and community organizing programs. It may be business and micro enterprise that you need to help them develop. I'll tell you a story in Africa, for example. Up north where I work, in the land of the Madi people, up in Moyo, they have a phrase, because there's mango trees everywhere in Moyo. They say, oh, we don't have to fight the monkeys for the mangoes, because there's plenty of mangoes. So I asked them one time, I said, how much will it cost me to buy 20 mangoes? And they said, oh, 20 mangoes, maybe 1,000 shillings. And I said, do you understand that in Kampala, the capital city, that one mango will sell for anywhere from 2,500 shillings to 3,500 shillings, just one mango. And 3,500 shillings equals $1. And they said to me, yes, they're very expensive in Kampala. But here, we don't have to fight the monkeys for the mangoes. And I said, I understand that. But what if we collected mangoes here, 20 mangoes for 1,000 shillings, and transported them to Kampala? They said, oh, they're very expensive in Kampala. I said, yes, I understand that. I'm not talking about buying them in Kampala. I'm talking about selling them in Kampala. And they said, oh, it's very expensive in Kampala. They never quite grasped the idea that I can make triple my money on every mango. Instead of making 3,000 shillings, I could make more than that. My one mango, 20 would cost me 1,000 shillings, but I could sell those 20 for over 60,000 shillings in Kampala. But it never quite computed. That's helping meet a long-term chronic need. So there are two types. Now, in talking about this, there are some things that relief ministries can do. One is softening the target group. Now, by that I mean, when there is a disaster, a problem, and there's been some type of disaster, helping out in a humanitarian way can open the doors For example, up in the north, just west of us, in the Moyo district, there was a place called Aliba that had an outbreak of cholera. People were dying. I scraped up some money. We bought antibiotic IV fluids. We took them to Aliba. We treated about 225 people. No one else died after we got there. They all recovered, the ones we treated, and the outbreak was over. It was a highly Muslim area. The imam came to see me and asked me the question, why did you do this? We are Muslim, you are Christian. And I said, well, the God of the Bible teaches us that we're supposed to love everyone. You had a need because people were dying that you could not address. I had the means to meet the need, so I did. So we gave you that. And he said, if the God of the Bible teaches you to love like that, we need to know more about the God of the Bible. Can you come back and tell us more about the God of the Bible? And I said, I would love to come back. He said, are you also the one who starts schools? I said, yes, sir. We start some Christian schools. He said, we have no school in Aliba. Can you come to Aliba and open a school? I said, now you understand these are Christian schools. He said, if the God of the Bible teaches you to love like that, then we need to know more about the God of the Bible. So, relief ministries can soften the target group. Number two, it can provide a viable platform for outsiders to enter. When I went to Aliba, then I was greeted as a hero because we had helped save lives. They were more open to me sharing with them about God's love. It provided a platform for outsiders to enter that Muslim area. Third thing is you gain a long-term presence there because now they trust you. You're there to help. They understand that. And it oftentimes, the fourth thing, corrects a preconceived ideas about Christians, which is what it did in the village of Aliba. They thought Christians were always their enemies, but we're not. And so that's things that relief ministries can do. All right, let's look at things that what relief ministries cannot do on their own. Number one is evangelize. If all you're doing is providing food and clothing and shelter, then they're not hearing the gospel. You can take care of every physical need they have, and they will still die and go to devil's hell if you don't tell them the gospel. So a relief ministry, in and of itself, while it is a good thing, it is not a great thing because it doesn't evangelize. Secondly, it doesn't make disciples. You have got to be intentional about sharing the gospel, and you have to be intentional about witnessing to that person and teaching that person to grow in grace and faith as a disciple. A third thing a relief ministry cannot do on its own is plant churches. If you spend 20 years of your life being the best bush doctor that there has ever been, the day you leave, they are no better off than they were the day you came. You have to invest in spiritual things as well as the humanitarian needs. It has to be both. Just doing relief ministry, Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you. Help them. Help them grow in grace. Help them become a believer in Jesus Christ. Give them something eternal, not just something that is temporal. So while they are great things to do, they can't do it on their own. So let's talk about potential problems with relief ministries. And there are a couple of real potential problems. First of all, is a creation of dependency of the target group. If you're going in there and you are feeding them every day, if you are giving them food and clothing and you're helping them every day, you can create a dependency on that target group. For example, we have a lot of refugees that came over to Uganda fleeing the trouble in Sudan. And they put them in camps. And there, the UNHR began to give them food, began to provide water for them, some of these people decided they liked living in the camps more than living in their war-torn country. So they decided to stay. And I'm talking about staying not for 6 months, not 12 months, but staying 5 years, 10 years, because they got food, clothing, and shelter all provided for them, and they didn't have to do anything. Those children began to grow up depending upon the UNHR. They didn't desire to work anymore because they could have it given to them if they just stayed in the camp. So that's a potential problem. A second one is a shift in focus from the main thing to the program itself. Now, by that I mean, if you're there and you're starting a program of feeding people, let's say, after a while, you get so engulfed by the needs of that ministry, collecting the food, hiring people to cook the food, having a way to distribute the food, having a way to pay the workers, to restock the shelves, to keep the cooking utensils and food supplies and all that sources, that becomes your main focus. And it's shifted from eternal matters to just keeping the ministry open. Just keep doing what you're doing. So there's a potential problem in shifting to just running the school or just running the food line or just running whatever. Then there's the ethical issue of making rice Christians. And we've seen this all over the world where you tell a person, if you'll just come into our compound, we will feed you, clothe you, and take care of you. Okay? We just want you to become a Christian. They will say, okay, I don't know what a Christian is, but if it involves free food, free housing, and free clothing, then I'm all for it. And they're doing it not because they accept Christ, but because they're getting free things. That's known as a rice Christian. Okay, they're coming just for the rice, not for any spiritual truth. Now you have an ethical problem. Okay, are you really reaching them for the gospel? Or are you being duped into just providing their physical needs, and they'll say whatever you want me to say? I went into a village one time, and I was talking to several of the local pastors around that village. And I asked them, I said, now, this village has no church. How would y'all propose to start a church here? And one pastor said, well, whatever you say, we'll do it. I said, it's not about what I say. I'm asking your ideas. And a second one piped up and said, well, it's your money. Whatever you want to do, we'll help you do it. And I said, no, I'm not talking about my money. I'm talking about you reaching this village with the gospel because these are your neighbors and your relatives. What do you want to do? So I had to make sure that they were doing it for the right reason, not just for the money that they thought that village was going to get. Another thing, a potential problem, it can cause a high profile in a non-secure area. For example, if you are, like I was, close to the South Sudanese border, and it is known that you were providing medical supplies to the local health centers. Well, now those local health centers become a high-profile target in a non-secure area because rebels understand that if they come in and steal all those provisions, that I will likely come back and restock that facility again. So now they have a high-profile target in a non-secure area where they can keep raiding and getting things. Another potential problem is that it becomes time-consuming. How much time are you going to spend taking care of humanitarian needs versus taking care of spiritual needs? So, there's only so many hours in a day. How much time are you going to spend doing what? And then finally, another potential problem is the need of specialized skills. If you're going to have medical clinics, then you've got to spend some time recruiting medical personnel to staff those. Doctors, nurses, technicians, lab assistants. So while you're helping, you're also having to go outside the spiritual realm of finding soul winners and pastors and church planners to find people who have specialized skills for the specialized ministries that you've started. So these are potential problems, but you need to be aware of those. Can they be addressed and overcome? Absolutely. But you have to be prepared that the potential is out there. So all these things are good, but you have to make sure you understand the potential problems. I hope you enjoy your weekend, and may God bless you.